I hope you guys know that I'm a former Wolfpack volunteer, and I might get involved with doing it again. And what the Wolfpack was Cenk Ungar's attempt to basically get money out of politics, and he was one of the only people that was actually doing it with a model that I supported and believe in, which is, that actually has teeth, which is via Article 5 and convening, the states together to gather momentum for in favor of an amendment that would have, undone Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. These issues matter to me a lot. I just came away from Tina Kotek has not been a great ally of our movement at all, to say the least. She does not have the support of those guys. I very much don't think in this whole debate, and she doesn't. So any statements I make here, I don't know what if Wolfpack Oregon is even going to endorse anybody, but as far as I'm concerned, as an individual, in this race, having watched the governor's debate, if that were the only issue that mattered to me, I would probably not be saying the things that I'm going to say today. The truth of the matter is just that I think that getting money out of politics ought to be the first thing that we focus on because it comes at the expense of every other issue. The truth of the matter in politics is ultimately that money drives too many of the decisions, and in order to get things like legitimate, or decent enough a decent enough climate agenda for climate change through, you're gonna have to eliminate the power of the fossil fuel corporations, to interfere with that with their lobbying efforts along the backside. And they expect us to be naive and think that money doesn't matter in politics. They're always like, if you bring it up to these candidates, a lot of the time they'll try to pretend that it's just not significant, that they can take these corporate donations without it changing the way that they think, like they're some kind of fucking superhero. And like we aren't all influenced by the fact that somebody gave money to us generously. That stated, I literally hate Tina Kotek, and I want you guys to know that, but I am voting for her because I feel very strongly about the other two candidates in the race. You see, I am very enthusiastic ultimately about ballot measures and the fact that ballot measures exist. I like the way that they can hamstring the legislator in such a way that, you know, uh, one of the only reasons why Oregon even gets as much climate action as it ultimately does as a state is because we are able to grassroots organize ballot measures together, and they are literally terrified in their of the legislature of us making the decision for elected officials. We are able to strong arm them into doing it. We, as the voters, are ultimately the people that are responsible and holding the keys to our elections. The power is really ultimately up to us, the voters, and not to the people that we actually elect into office. They are accountable, really, under the Constitution to us in particular. And unfortunately, when these people are elected into power, they often end up representing the big business and industry. But in this, my reasons for endorsing Tina Kotek in this race, despite my absolute revulsion for her as a person, because of the fact that she has, by all appearances, was one of the people that was in the way the most when it came to getting, money out of politics and via a constitutional avenue. Was one of the people that was the most in the way, and I got myself blocked on Twitter for by her, for fighting as hard as I did for it, and tagging them as much as I did. My original account before I got kicked off there, the platform entirely got, you know, it just like I was banned for doing a. I don't want to talk about it, but I suicide baited, those who I felt were appropriating, feminism for the purposes of advancing transphobia, and I would call them farts for that rather than turfs, because I have serious reasons to doubt that organizations like Wolf, the Women's Liberation Front, are legitimately feminist organizations because you know, they support the Heritage Foundation. They work with the Heritage Foundation despite its, you know, massive history of getting in the way of LGBTQIA people and citizens, in this country, and working to rescind their rights and their liberties in this society. Tina Kotek herself is a lesbian. That doesn't really ultimately matter to me. It's not the reason why I'm voting for her. The biggest reason was that I just watched a a debate that took place between all of them. I walked away from it thinking Drazden as a candidate kind of pissed me off. Not because of the fact that she was advocating for change, but it was the way that she continually hammered the other two on the basis of this idea that anybody believes in, the way that Oregon's been going or is a big supporter of the status quo. I think that the legislator in Oregon has been through, a massive ordeal in that Oregon itself has been crying out for change, where Portland itself, when it comes to Portland proper, is well aware that the city has a massive homelessness problem. It's well aware that there's a need for change and direction. Nobody is up there in Portland itself thinking, yeah, we can keep going down the road that we've been going. Of education related issues, nobody here on this stage was preaching anything that I really believe in. I will say about education that I am fully in support of scrapping the current model of education and going over to Montessori education. I believe to the core of my soul, and to with everything in me, I am fully convinced that Oregon schools are bad. They've been bad for a while, but what I saw up there on the stage was an unfortunate, tendency to basically pin the blame on them being shut down for 2 years for the falling test scores that had transpired on the test. And I think that Oregon schools have a long history of failing, and it goes back much further than just the Brown administration. This has been a thing here in Oregon, but really, I mean, having been a product of that system and come up through that system myself, all the way until about seventh grade, where we moved out of state, I can tell you that my belief is that the public education system in America is abysmal. It's one of the worst systems in the known world, really. I mean, there are countries that we despise and we are in competition with that we think of as problematic in every other way, but education that we look to for lessons in education, the enemy countries, so to speak, on the issue. I believe that America's education model, when it went over to this system that was designed, by the from what we can tell, it was designed to foster obedience, and it was, the Prussian system, so to speak, that was put forward because of the fact that you know there are all these systems in place that were inspired by Germany and America. That's just absolutely nuts. Like the fact that we turn the clocks forward and back is the same thing. It's this one you know Reich Marshal over there in Germany that inspired the whole thing. There's no reason to continue doing it. There's every reason to lock the clocks back, a few hours so that people can get a little bit more sleep, and it lowers fatalities and everything from the loss of sleep on the roads. The only thing that we get for it is we get nothing for it, and it comes at the expense of our mortal risk to our lives. But the biggest animating issue on this for me, I think, at the end of the day, was the realization that both Betsy Johnson and Christine, you know, both of them were basically advocating doing something about Measure 101. Betsy Johnson had a huge history of campaigning against Measure 101, which was very unfortunate and a massive stain on her record as far as I'm concerned. And Dresden wants to repeal it. The only candidate that was speaking to what I believe was actually Tina Kotek. Despite the fact that other people believe that she lost this one, I think Measure 101 is imperfect, but the truth of the matter is that for me, one of the reasons why I voted for it was under the realization, well, this bill isn't perfect, but I feel like anything is better than continuing to try to finance and fight an unwinnable drug war. You know, the drug war in of itself and the consequences of it have been tragic. People say that drugs destroy lives, but the truth of the matter is that persecuting people for using and throwing them in prison, and the damage that the carceral state has done to drug addicts and their lives is far more extensive than the drugs themselves did to people and their lives. The drug war itself has ripped families apart. It's pushed drug users into the ghetto, and why maybe they can't live with their families, that doesn't mean that they need to live, far, 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 as far the fuck away from them as possible, and that they need 17 layers of separation from their actual folks, so it pushes them into communities where drug use is tolerated, and expected from the people who have a very turn a blind eye to it pushes them out of their local communities and everything, and into the arms of those communities in particular that are the most run down and ravaged by drug use, where people are presumably more friendly to kicking back and using in that kind of way. And measure 101, I mean, Betsy Johnson wants to pitch it up to us again, and I can tell her only that if you did that, I would vote for the bill again. Drazin seems to want to repeal it, and it's like it's the will of the people at this point that has interfered with it. I'm one of those people. I feel that the drug war is a fucking disaster, that we have fully militarized the police, that in states where they are still trying to fight it, they are getting their asses walloped in a battle that they aren't even coming close to winning. You know, the truth of the matter that's so horrifying about all this and is that the Coast Guard isn't actually all that great at catching the narco subs. The only reason why it even, we have an incestuous media that has a close relationship with law enforcement that prefers ultimately over there in the media, to report every time the Coast Guard does bust up a narco sub. But what they really should do is headline it, oh look, the Coast Guard caught a narco sub. Too bad 9 out of 10 of them get through successfully. You know, the government is attempting to wage a PR campaign to pretend that it's doing anything useful about the drug menace. It isn't doing anything useful. The fact is that where they are fighting, the state isn't even coming close to even mounting a meaningful resistance to the drug menace. You are getting your ass. The state is getting its ass handed to it properly. It is not even mounting a meaningful fight against it. Prohibition is a miserable failure as far as an approach to the drug menace and the problem. It's not only and it has turned into a vacuum that has siphoned up too many resources to fight a battle that, is still that there is no hope of it ever prevailing in. Prohibition has never worked. The Romans themselves had a huge period of trying to prohibit substances. They even went over to the death penalty. It didn't work. One of the massive lessons of history seems to be that, attempting to, have a prohibited and black market and have contraband and everything is a guaranteed policy to fail. And it doesn't matter that we have modern technology, it still fails. And it fails 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 every time it's been tried across history. It has been a failure consistently. It's like the way that people say all fiat currencies go to zero. All prohibition policies eventually fail. And it doesn't matter how high you raise the stakes. You could literally kill people for being addicts. The way that 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 guy over in the Philippines did. Um, Duterte. His government, he had done everything in his power to kill drug users and have a policy of extrajudicially killing drug users and drug dealers to fight the Sabu problem, which is their code word for crystal meth. Sabu is still a serious problem in the Philippines, despite the mountain of bodies that have been stacked to deal with this. The death penalty, even in an extrajudicial fashion, does not work. It's not particularly effective at curbing the temptation to buy and sell drugs. It's not enough, you know? If that is not enough to basically clamp down on the problem, what makes you think that here in the United States that beefing up the police to raid the cartels is going to be enough, that the jail time we put them through will be enough? People don't care if it cuts their life short and kills them. They will do what it takes for that revenue. They will take that risk and risk anything to get it. And I hate to break it to you, but there is no hope whatsoever of ever having a world without drugs. Drug users and the people that want to experiment with that stuff will be with us for eternity. The sooner that we make peace with that and become willing to accept it, the better. You know, of Measure 101 and my reasons for supporting it, I think the bill was imperfect. I think that it should do more to force people into rehab because the problem with the drug menace is that you can't win it on the supply side of the equation. We keep thinking that we can win this one by wiping out the supply, but the supply chain just keeps adjusting to, basically deal with the fact that it's being persecuted by governments all around the world. It just reroutes itself to stay in business despite all the actions by the state that it, has attempted. You've been fighting a war on drugs for 100 years and you have not even made a scratch in the scale of the problem. It's been a failure from start to finish. It has never even come close to even having a meaningful impact on the problem. It's a joke in of itself. It's a farcical policy, and we continue to do this. It's the height of irrationality to continue attempting to fight a war that cannot, and fundamentally the limits of it, that it can't be won. We know this. And yet politician after politician has swept through the United States saying that we can't wave a white red flag to it. But what is the alternative? We can't wave a white flag to it, but what is the alternative when it becomes readily apparent that fighting it, that by trying to clamp down on it, and the Washington's policies on this one of prohibition are not just a failure, but an epic failure of epic proportions, not like truly epic. Not just the way that we misuse that term that has come to mean nothing. In this current culture, I know it's an overused cliche word now, but I mean it back in the old days, with the way that it was before it became overused. This is a just the scale of this failure is stagger. It will make you stagger when you pull back and you look at it. It's overwhelming the amount of failure that you're watching when it comes to this. And we act like we're even not that the government in other states where the war is still being fought the way that it was being fought, that the government is even making a meaningful even mounting a meaningful resistance to this. Disillusioned cops will occasionally come forward and admit the truth of the matter, which is that you'll arrest a dealer and within 4 hours there will be a turf battle on the streets to claim what's left of the market. I hate to break it to you, but there is no winning this war. We need to make peace with that. The one thing that we need to do is get away from criminalizing it, get away from that, and embrace a policy of harm reduction towards addicts and their families. You know, because prohibition, the only effect that it's had on them is to damage their lives even further. The damage the government has done to the lives of the people that are addicted is much more extensive than the drug itself did. What we should be doing is teaching people about these drugs, their effects in the bodies, and how to basically take these drugs and minimize the harmful effects of them to reduce them as much as possible. So, to these other two candidates, all I have to say is two middle fingers up in the sky. Fuck this. We voted for 101. How dare you question the wisdom of the voters of this state? We weren't wrong, and I'm with Tina Kotek in making some, adjustments to the policy to do more about rehab. On other issues, when it comes to education, I don't believe in the model that we are putting forward, but I didn't see any candidate up there on that stage that came close to representing what I believe. I believe that the American education model is a miserable failure, and that, more to the point, the American education system is too broken to be repaired. What we need to do to the American education system is to scrap the model that we have and start over from scratch. I mean, I hate to break it to you. Our education system all over the country has been failing to live up to international standards for over 30 years at this point. The education model that we have embraced doesn't work very effectively. The Montessori education system is vastly superior at teaching our kids the skills that they actually need to succeed in the modern world. What we should be doing is scrapping the current model and going over to Montessori schools and the Montessori model. It should displace the one that we have at taxpayer expense. That is the only policy that I'm willing to throw my weight behind and say that I support. Anything short of that, I oppose. I don't believe that any of these candidates has embraced a policy that will bring progress to our schools. I'm so I hate to break it to you, but I just don't believe in the current educational model that we are stuck in. I believe that the system also is entrenched and makes it very difficult to do what needs to be done about the current education model. That many of the voters themselves and the people in our system stand directly in the way of actually fixing the system. There are many people that have made themselves a problem, as far as educational reform is concerned, and stand directly in the way of the kinds of systematic dismantling of the current system that needs to take place. The current model is a failure. We need to move on. You know, I because of these reasons, I've basically chosen to vote for Kotek. To me, the drug problem, and a switch over is meaningful enough. It's enough, really, at the end of the day, to basically say that what I want is to fix Measure 101. I don't want to repeal it, and if Betsy Johnson and the other two candidates want to pitch it back to the voters, we will just return the same exact verdict that we gave them in the first place. I was one of the voters on the A campaign. I think it's an indictment against Betsy Johnson that she campaigned against it. Betsy Johnson wants to continue down a road that will not yield progress, that has already proven to be a failure. It's time to come to terms with reality. The current approach, the current way that the government has been attempting to fight this war, and continuing to put it in the hands of law enforcement has not even come close to it making a meaningful impact on the problem. It is time to embrace a different kind of drug policy in the United States.